He said, certainly World Youth Day as well, to the group of San Egidio, a group that really comes together to pray in Rome and also do service to the poor, especially through food. He said this just a month ago. Taking things seriously does not mean paying at being serious. I wrote it down wrong. Sorry. A church that is accident-prone rather than one that is sick because it's closed in on itself is no good for us. So he'd rather have an accident-prone church risking things than one that's closed off on itself. Finally, I want to tell you about an experience I had with the Jesuits this summer before we move into this next piece. I snuck myself into a Jesuit high school and college forum with Pope Francis in this aula inside Vatican City. And he was supposed to come on at 12 noon, and I was sitting in front with all these Jesuits. A friend of mine, Jose Mesa, got me in. So I was about maybe from the back wall to here, and I'm sitting in the front row. He's supposed to come in at 12 noon. At 11:45, he comes in, and everybody goes crazy. There's kids are singing like Christian Catholic Italian rap songs, believe it or not. And they're all, oh my God, the Pope. And he comes walking over there, and you could just see the guards running after him. It's like, well, you weren't supposed to be here for 15 minutes, right? And so we settle down, and he sits down. He's got two cardinals behind him, and he holds up this, and he says, you know, they gave me this to read. It takes about 20 minutes. He kind of leans forward in his chair. I think I can tell you what it says in 3 minutes. What do you want me to do? Well, the whole place, 3 minutes, yeah, that's who they are. So they think this is so great. And basically what he says is, what is Jesuit education? This is my interpretation from the Italian. It's a magnanimous heart at the service of the intellect. Then he puts this paper down, he gives it to him, he says, okay, we have an hour, what do you want to do? Literally, the provincial of Italy had no idea what to do. He got together with some of the principals and rectors of the schools, and they decided to do a question and answer with a little kid who was like 6, then 10, then 15, then 20, all the way up to a professor at one of these schools. And what I was most struck with is they would be asking these questions, and way off to the side would be where the question was, and the Pope was kind of in the center of the aula, the auditorium. And after the kid would ask a question, the question was like, hey, I'm from Sicily. Have you gonna ever go to Sicily? And the Pope would say, well, I'd like to go to Sicily, that kind of a thing. That's also where he said that he would need to see a psychiatrist if he lived in the papal apartments. And so you have to hear that in Italian, psychiatrist? Everybody's writing this down. Again, we have to almost go to these kind of events to get a sense of what's going on. Anyway, what he would do is he literally would get up and walk all the way over, and we're talking at least the length of this room. He would put his hand on a kid, he would give him a kiss on both cheeks, he would give him a hug, and then he would walk over. He never had the student have to enter into his space. He always entered the space of the person asking the question. And I thought that was very, very moving, actually, of him getting up and doing all this effort, making sure that who was most comfortable was the students asking the questions. So that really, really touched me there. So we do see that this is a kind of style, that the images matter, and that images are changing the way we understand perhaps what the hierarchy, at least in the Vatican, or what the papacy is all about. I kind of want to go into this wonderful image because I think it's very good for this, this occasion here. The spirituality of, I think, this Pope, in some ways, the rhetoric of postmodernity. You know, he talks about the church as a field hospital. That's his favorite image or metaphor to talk about the church. Field hospital. A very different way of thinking about the church. You might think about postmodernity in I think the most simplest way is to say it goes from being the experience of authority versus the authority of experience. That in some ways it's the authority of experience that most resonates and gives people authority. It's not just, well, I've had this job, therefore you must listen to me. But my own experience is now part and parcel of my integrity, and that gives me my authority, right? Notice also the way he speaks, these juxtapositions of words and different levels of registers. In some ways, Pope Francis has a very pastiche kind of style of talking. He likes to take metaphors and put them into new frames of reference. So we do have the church as a field hospital. This is where he talks about it. These are some quotes that I'm just going to have with images now. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol and about the level of his blood sugars. You have to heal his wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds, heal the wounds. This is what he's saying. So again, this wonderful image, church's field hospital, this is how we're going to locate ourselves within the modern world. This is how we're going to grasp our place, the church's place within the modern world. The church as a charitable NGO. He's very suspicious of the church becoming a charitable NGO. A lot of these images I got from a blog on called First Thoughts, so I have to admit that I didn't put some of these images together. This is what he says. We can walk as much as we want. We can build many things. We can talk as much as we want. We can build many things. But if we do not profess Jesus Christ, things go wrong. We may become a charitable NGO, but not the church, the bride of Christ. So how do we keep Christ within the element of this field hospital? It's in some ways, he's kind of almost saying, where is this kind of dimension of the church in the world witnessing to Christ? Does anybody remember this one? What the metaphor is? The odor of sheep. He's talking about the humility of priests and especially bishops. He says, this is precisely the reason for the dissatisfaction of some who end up sad, sad priests, in some sense becoming collectors of antiques or novelties, instead of being shepherds living with the smell of their sheep. This I ask you, be shepherds with the odor of the sheep. Make it real as shepherds among your flock. A real different sensibility about what does a pastor do, taking that very ancient metaphor of the shepherd, that a bishop shepherds a flock or shepherds the diocese, and really kind of putting it in this kind of new way, right? Turning this metaphor on its head. I love this one too. The middle class of holiness is his phrase. He says, in God's great plan, every detail is important, even yours, even my humble little witness of those who live their faith with simplicity in everyday family relationships, work relationships, friendships. There are the saints of every day, the hidden saints, a sort of middle class of holiness to which we can all belong. So he wants to kind of say, certainly it's the big saints, it's the Ignatius and Francis of Assisi and all that kind of stuff, but there's also this everyday. How do I live a life of everyday sanctity? How do I live a life in this middle class sensibility? So he's taking a political, an economic experience and all that follows from that, and kind of using that in terms of a kind of a spiritual metaphor. God spray. I love it. We believe in God, who is Father, who is Son, who is Holy Spirit. We believe in persons. And when we talk to God, we speak with persons who are concrete and tangible, not some misty, diffused, God-like God spray that's a little bit everywhere, but who knows what it is. So he wants to, again, how do we talk about God? He brings it very, very real. It's not some vapor. It's not something untethered from flesh and blood, humanity, right? These are persons, and therefore we can have a conversation, we can have relationships with persons, we can't have relationships with spray. There's that house of cards, which I kind of already spoke to you with again. This came out of, this was in the America essay. The moral edifice of the church is likely to fall like a house of cards if it continues to focus on narrow issues such as abortion, gay rights, and all that. I see clearly that the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. A no church and a yes church. He's over that kind of dialectical division. He doesn't want that to be part of the church's way it works in society. There was, notice the past tense he says, there was a no church that said you cannot. No, 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 you must not. And again, these are just, he says no, no, no. I would love just to be hearing him talk like this wise pastor. He says there was a no church and a yes church that said, but let's think about it. Let's be open to this. The Spirit is opening the door to us. So he wants to kind of think about a yes church, and this is the closest thing I could find to a yes and a no. But there is a real sense that this is a discerning papacy, going into the world, finding what it can, that it can be open to, trying to build on those kinds of things. I would call this kind of a loyalty to the church, or what he calls the identity card Christianity. I don't know who this person is, but it was on Google. So, Christian identity is not an identity card. The great Paul VI said, "It is an absurd dichotomy to wish to live with Jesus but without the church, to love Jesus but without the church, to follow Jesus but without the church." And that Mother Church who gives us Jesus also gives us an identity which is not simply a rubber stamp. It is membership. Identity means membership, belonging to the church. This is beautiful. Okay, very, very different kind of style. Just two more. Hot red chili. He talked about pickled peppers. I wasn't sure to put red hot chili peppers or just a jar of peppers, but if we keep this joy to ourselves, it will make us sick in the end. Our hearts will grow old and wrinkled, and our faces will no longer transmit that great joy. Only nostalgia, melancholy, which is not healthy. Sometimes these melancholy Christian faces have more in common with pickled peppers than the joy of having a beautiful life. Joy cannot be held at heel. It must be let go. Joy is a pilgrim virtue. It is a gift that walks, that sings. Maybe not like the chili peppers, but at least it has there's something about it. It has a joy to it. Again, using this kind of everyday mundane. And I guess the one that's most gets the news is, and meets the front cover of The Advocate, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge a gay person of goodwill who seeks the Lord? You can't marginalize these people. Boom. Seems to have, it took the world by storm when he said this. Easy, in some ways, easy phrases, easy way of using language, but very serious and gets to the point quite well. So in some ways, I do think that this Pope has used language, has used images, has used words to kind of recalibrate, you might say, or put, Catholicism 2.0 or something like that, a new kind of way of kind of rebooting the conversation about how the papacy can work in the lives of the church, but also in the world. Mostly, this comes down to saying, maybe in another way, that this papacy is very much pastoral. And I would say it's pastoral over ideological. It's probably the most viable post-ideological, post-conservative, liberal kind of thing that I've witnessed in my lifetime. This Pope quickly assents to all the absolutes of the Roman Catholic tradition and then moves to the human condition. Always, if you watch him, he says, I'm a loyal son of the church. Of course we can't do this. And then he goes right into the situations of people's lives. Knowing with that as the background, how do I deal with what's in the foreground? Or knowing what's the text, how do I deal with context? Certainly in the moral life issues, he's much closer to Cardinal Bernardine's seamless garment ethos, where all of life from birth through death is valued, and there has to be some consistency on how we talk about that. I think it's very, very key that he wrote his papal exhortation, and he named it Evangelii Gaudium. He puts the word Gaudium in, and for Catholics who are theologians, Gaudium brings us back to the word Gaudium et Spes, that Vatican II document that Benedict had a few troubles with and John Paul II interpreted differently. He brings it back and says, this is how we're going to interpret the church in the modern world. Because that's what Gaudium et Spes, that's the Latin kind of name for the pastoral constitution of the church in the modern world. It's a fantastic document. You have to read it. I mean, it's really good reading. First, he quotes best practices of all the bishops' conferences throughout the world. Never seen that before. He says, well, like those African bishops do in South Africa, we got to do this. And when those Canadian bishops have said this, that's what we got to do. Those American bishops, United States, they said this about war. This is a good thing. He kind of gathers up, not just this is what I believe, but what are the bishops throughout the world saying that are best practices? Personally, for me, my favorite part is he chides priests and bishops, say a better homily. And he gives us how you do it. So he gives us a little lecture, a little lesson on writing a homily. It's like 5 or 6, 7 paragraphs, but it's kind of fun. Don't bore the people. Do this, do this. Be ahead about the gospel. It reminded me of being back in seminary training. Social justice as the pastoral response. No economies of exclusion, no more trickle-down theories, no what he calls, I like that word, soulless capitalism. Here's just a couple quotes from here from Evangelia Gaudium. The promise was that when the glass was full, it would overflow, benefiting the poor. But what happens, it said, is that when the glass is full, it magically gets bigger. Nothing ever comes out for the poor. So he's really taking on. And of his experience of the terrible inflation in Argentina that really wiped out almost the entire middle class for about 8 to 10 years. Literally, people were coming to him who were middle class, who were coming into food lines around 2000, 2001. I think this is where he learned on the level of people's lives that capitalism, not a bad thing, but a soulless capitalism is not so good. He writes, also, some people continue to defend trickle-down theories which assume that economic growth encouraged by a free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world. This opinion, which has never been confirmed by any facts, expresses a crude and naive trust in the goodness of those wielding economic power and in the sacralized workings of the prevailing economic system. So he's saying very succinctly what I think it might have taken papal talk, an encyclical to write. 40 pages, he can say in a paragraph, because of the way that he kind of uses language in a new way. Very unpapal, the language that he uses. He also talks about, that kind of ends part 2. Part 3 then is, this last part is, he's a reforming pope, reformation of a loyal son of the church, not a revolution. And I think mostly that has come up in terms of running the church's Vatican bureaucracy, the curia, what we call the curia. He says he wants to kind of do a kind of a leveling with the hierarchy. Clericalism or careerism, professional climbing in the church, he calls it a form of leprosy. You know, you might not know this, but Jesuits actually take a vow, almost kind of to tattletale on any other Jesuit who's ambitioning for a position in the church. So we're actually supposed to kind of tell on each other, or tell our superiors, because Ignatius thought ambition and pride were the two hallmarks that could get in the way of the mission of the society, or make a good Jesuit become a not so good Jesuit, right? I think that this has been completely internalized by Pope Francis, that any kind of clericalism, any kind of rising through the ranks, ambitioning to be a shepherd or ambitioning for power, he just will have no part of it. He writes this in an address to all the papal nuncios who are supposed to be gathering data about who could be the next bishop. This is going on right now in Chicago, looking for a new bishop. In the delicate task of carrying out inquiries for episcopal appointments, be careful that the candidates are pastors, close to the people, fathers and brothers, that they are gentle, patient, and merciful, animated by inner poverty, the freedom of the Lord, and also by outward simplicity and austerity of life, that they do not have the psychology of princes. He's gone so far as this is such a big thing that he's actually he's suspended a bishop who spent a lot of money in Germany, and actually he's left his diocese because he spent too much money on things that weren't for the poor. It was really for his own, for the diocesan center. I don't want to accuse this man too much because I have only read this in the newspapers. But apparently he spent $42 million of the diocese money for a residence and a Catholic center in his diocese. And this really bothered a lot of German Catholics, that so much money. He was let go, and the Pope actually had his resignation tendered. Also, the Vatican Bank, that's really hot in the news. He's got a commission. He's trying to clean up the Vatican Bank, maybe even close it. He closed the diocesan bank in Argentina, so he's willing and able to do that. But we're not sure what he'll do. He's certainly cleaning it up. He's closing accounts where there was money laundering. They say that he just talked about the mafia, I guess, was it a couple of days ago? Again, you have to go every day to see what he's going to say. But he was talking about the mafia, how they're all going to go to hell. Well, the mafia are the ones we think were some of the people that were doing some of the money laundering through different bishops and monsignors, whoever it might be. And so they're probably the most upset with cleaning up the Vatican Bank. Finally, we have these group of 8. They're called the C8, the cardinals. The 8 cardinals one from each geographical region of the world, who in some ways are now getting the responsibility for management of the Vatican Curia. Matter of fact, I think when they meet next time, they're meeting very soon, they're going to put into law that these 8 actually will be the ones that they have a legal right to change and to reform the Vatican Curia. They're planning a new constitution as we speak. Certainly, the new round of cardinals. He picks a young, probably the youngest cardinal I think we have from Haiti. And a place that had never had a cardinal. It's not Port-au-Prince, but it's another smaller diocese because of this man's love for the poor and the people's love for him. New priorities on his travels: Lampedusa, talking to those who are refugees. The Rio de Janeiro, the favelas, going outside of the comfort margin of the World Youth Day and actually going to where the poor are. And of course, prison is a good place to start washing feet. So let me just finish a little bit. I think, do I have one more slide? Yeah. Certainly, he's well loved by even those. This is by an atheist street artist in Rome who has got this, and of course, this makes all the newspapers as well. Kind of a pope with his bag of. He carries his own valise. He doesn't allow anybody else to do that. There's no secretary that does it for him. And kind of, as a superhero, right? The Pope as superhero. The Pope actually said he doesn't like being called this. He thinks this is ridiculous. But in some ways, it lends itself because it's such a radical difference. I think he wants to evangelize the world to convert the church in some ways. If John Paul II and Benedict XVI were mostly about persuading a skeptical world to put its faith in the Catholic Church, Francis is trying to persuade a fearful church to go out and get engaged with the world. You can see this with the interviews he does with well-known scholarly atheists and journalists of Italy. His cold calls to all these people who have somehow he hears word of something, or he's watching TV and he hears something and he calls the person, he finds out the phone number. All of a sudden he picks it up. You pick it up and it's like, oh, this is Pope Francis. He called somebody and he called some nun in Spain, an Argentinian nun, just out of the blue. I mean, makes major headlines all through Spain. He's very Jesuit, going out to the periphery. He wants a church that gets out. Because he's afraid that it's gotten a little sick looking at its own kind of navel-gazing. And it's very Jesuit, I think, in this sense. The church can only be true to itself when it goes outside and leaves behind its internal disputes. I think the big way for me to understand what's the difference between Benedict XVI and Francis is they are, in some ways, theologically, in terms of just the theology, they're very similar. And I actually like Pope Benedict's theology. He was not a very good manager of the Vatican. He would admit that. He steps down. This is the great gift he gives to the church. I think you might consider Pope Benedict, his understanding of church, his ecclesia, the word ecclesia, was all about liturgy. Ecclesia, liturgia. It was all about the liturgy of all of us coming together in this space in the church praying. That was his world. This Pope Francis his church is ecclesia diaconia. The church as servant. A deacon, for example, is a servant, right? The church as a servant to the world. It's a very different way of saying, being very orthodox, but taking two aspects of what the Roman Catholic Church has been throughout its history, both the worshiping community and the serving community, and just kind of perhaps changing the balances of those two words. I think this is how he most wants to be remembered, not as the superhero, going off with his valise, but really in these embraces, these kinds of images that he is so known for. Every single time he sees someone, it makes the news. So that's we have 5 minutes. That's not a whole lot for questions, but that's my sense of this first year of Pope Francis. On Thursday, if you're up on the other campus, we're having a whole day symposium. Some of the bigwigs, who are much bigger than I am, speaking about Pope Francis's first year, including John Allen from the NCR and from the Boston Globe, probably the best Vaticanologist out there. Matt Malone, the publisher, editor of America Magazine, and Miguel Diaz, the former U.S. ambassador to the Vatican, will be speaking too. Thank you.